Aloha, everyone. Thank you for joining us for part 2 of the Launch Your E-commerce workshop. To give Paolo ample time to answer all your questions at the end of this class, I'm going to hand it over right to him. Paolo, the floor is yours.
Hi, folks. Thanks for joining. I assume most folks have done part 1 just a couple days ago, so thanks for coming back. If you haven't, we basically got into talking about why you might want to use certain platforms for e-commerce over another based on your needs for the types of products that you have and so forth. We went over a little bit of a general starting a business kind of primer, and then we went into kind of picking out design options, theming, and some content management stuff within Shopify, which is the platform that's being demoed here again today. So today, overall, we want to go through sort of more setup of a new e-commerce site on Shopify, talk about some of the critical components and important things that you should be covering and thinking about and strategizing. We will go into a little bit more nitty-gritty in terms of shipping, fulfillment, customer service, best practices for those options, etc. Touch on international sales, and then sort of get into a little bit of the marketing sphere as well. So that's what's on deck later. And just a brief primer on me. If you haven't been here before, I run a web design development digital marketing agency based in Honolulu with also locations in New York and Massachusetts. We're a small team, but we've developed a lot of e-commerce stores over the years. And so this has been my wheelhouse, my bread and butter for about 15 years. Also a note on sort of questions and comments. If there's small questions relating to the sort of topic we're on, I'm going to try to keep tabs on them and sort of answer them as we're going. And if there's things that I just can't get to for time, or they're a sort of more involved answer, I will try to answer those as part of the Q&A at the end. So first off, I want to talk about information architecture. So basically what that means, and it has a fancy title, but it's basically the structure of your site, the taxonomy of how your pages connect to each other and cross-link, your navigation, your menu. That's all part of the information architecture. If you were to map out the IA of your site, it might look kind of like a flow chart with sort of boxes for different pages. Let's see that, you know, homepage links to this and that page links to that, and the actual, you know, web of your site would be tied together. The reason why it's important to map this out as you're building a site is because there are some standards and some best practices in terms of how this is done. And if you go against the grain and you don't really pay attention, you just sort of put whatever's on your mind up there, potentially customers will be confused, or they'll have to hesitate or think or root around and really try to be able to figure out, you know, where things are and how to find them. And the more uncertainty we have in the process of, you know, shopping, browsing, adding to cart and checkout, then the more opportunities there are for people to get frustrated, to leave, to get distracted, etc. What I often tell folks is, in terms of the sort of path to conversion, it's really not just one red flag or one thing that prevents someone from checking out or makes them decide not to follow through all the way that day. It's really a lot of little things that may add up. And this is one of the core things, which it seems kind of subtle, or it might seem kind of obvious, but ultimately it's going to have a huge impact in terms of how people use your site and are able to navigate it and interact with it. So what I actually recommend is, though we live in a bit of a digital world, is to grab a, you know, blank sheet of printer paper or something and a pen and actually kind of draw it out. It's sort of easier, unless you're really good at Photoshop or something, or have a flowchart software, to just really lay it out and say, okay, what are all the things I want to sell? What are all the different types of pages I need to have, and how should those connect in terms of the navigation. And that's easier to do that than it is to sort of type it out, in my opinion. If you're a spreadsheet person, you might want to do a little spreadsheet, and each link is a cell or something like that. It's really up to you. As an absolute baseline for even a small e-commerce store, you're going to want a homepage, obviously, the collections or the catalog. So this would be the groupings of products. For a small store, you might just have one collection that just has your 4 products. If you're bringing a lot of SKUs online, a lot of different products, you might have 30 collections or 90 collections or what have you, because you have so many different types of products that they each have their own sort of subcategories. You're always going to link to the cart because you always want people to find the cart. You should always have an about page because people want to know what your brand is about, what your company is about. And the newer you are, or the more digital you are in terms of maybe you're just starting an online store and there's no retail presence, or you're not really known in your community or what have you, you always just need to have some shingle out there that says, hey, this was founded by so-and-so, and this is our story. Now, it can be pretty basic. We'll get into some of the sort of trust signals in a few slides, but you should really have one because people want to know. And if you don't have it, then they're like, huh, I wonder why can't I find out information about this company? And that's one of those little red flags. It's like, why don't they say who they say they are? You always need to have a contact page. We'll talk about that a little bit more in trust too, but it should at least have a form or an email or a method of contact. And at best, it has a physical location if you have one, and a phone number and so forth. You should have clearly defined shipping, returns, and privacy policies as well. This is really important. If you can start a store, and if you've maybe seen some sort of smaller startup-y stores, sort of a little bit more mom and pop, they might not have had one, but this will bite you if you don't do it. There will come a point where someone says, hey, why didn't I get this in time, or I want my money back, and there's going to be no policy that you can refer to, and it's basically, your word against theirs, or whatever the case may be. You need to have a policy so it's clear before someone decides to commit to purchase what the rules are. How do I return something? How can I exchange something? How much is shipping? Do you ship to my state or country or what have you? And then also, how you're handling people's information. And then you should also decide, whether you want a blog or any other type of content page, and how much you want to have that be prominent in your site. And that's one of these decisions in the sort of architecture phase is, okay, well, if I want to have a blog because I want to create content and I want to tell the story, and there's a bunch of other reasons we'll talk about later why you might want a blog. But I also don't want people to just read the blog. I actually want them to still primarily shop. And so, to what level do I emphasize it? To what level do I sort of push it below the surface? And how much cross-linking, cross-promotion of things are there? And how much are we sort of taking people out of the funnel, the buying process, and distracting them with other things on the site, which they still might come back, but you want to be intentional about how much you're promoting them. So this is something where you can look at different sites to find sort of what are sites that you like, how are they structuring their information, and then riffing off that and saying, oh, okay, I like how they do that, or I like that they called that, shop all or whatever, and you can borrow some inspiration from that. To that end, what I wanted to do is actually flip over to the browser and show you a couple sites that handle the information architecture in different ways. And this is really dependent on the scale of the company, the scale of the catalog, etc. These are all sites that we built and worked on and so forth. So that was part of our strategy in building something, is to figure out how to do this. So let me just switch browsers here. So the first site I'll share called Monfefo, they do a perishable, food products, ginger and turmeric shots that are cold pressed and so forth. They really decided to focus because they really only have sort of 4 core products. They do what they do and they do it well, and they're distribute widely, but that's really, they have a very narrow focus on their product line. That shop actually takes you just to the main collection where you can just get right into it. There's not a deep menu, there's not multiple things that you have to select, there's no drop down, you're just shopping right away. On the locations front, they want to emphasize that there are a lot of different places where you can get their products, and so if you don't want to pay to ship it, you can find it somewhere else. And so these are the 2 primary sort of paths that we want someone to go down. Like, do I immediately want to say, okay, do I want to buy it online, or do I want to find it somewhere else? About tells you that they have they're women-owned business, they have a social cause, they're using organic ingredients. It's telling the story of why they exist, what they care about, and so that you can align with their mission pretty much immediately and understand what that means. And then we have a cart, which is sort of a stylized basket, and we actually have a fly-out menu, which sort of puts the secondary actions, the things that not everyone will want to do, but things that if you're kind of digging around, you want to learn more, you want to figure out different things, you want to contact, you want to manage your subscription. These are things that you can do, but it's not the primary focus. So this is one way to look at how someone navigate the architecture for a site that has only really 4 core products. It could even potentially be more simpler than this, but as they do have subscriptions and things that need other types of engagement with folks, then there's extra content there. Another site that is totally different brand experience type of product, etc., is Bluffworks, which started out as a single product site. They just sold a single style of pants. They were based on Kickstarter, and then over time they grew out their catalog. And over time, there's different categories that classify the different general types of apparel that they have, and then within that, the specific styles, cuts, etc. And at a certain point, too, they were originally a menswear company. They added women's wear, and though the women's wear line is separate and smaller, that became its own section. And so it mirrors the style of content in the way that you'd look for and interact with that link in the same way, where we have sort of accessories and gift cards and sale items all on the right, and the specific styles and categories on the left. Again, they do have a blog called Journeys, but there's no drop down for it. It's not the primary focus, but there's still the about there. There's still the sort of core, who are they, what do they have? And because they have a larger catalog, there's also search included here. For a lot of sites that are smaller, you're just not going to need search because you can find everything you need within 2-3 clicks. Also want to show Field Company, which is cast iron pan company. Again, a single product company based on Kickstarter. Started out with one thing and one thing only. Did that really well for a few years, and then have expanded out more recently. Instead of a drop-down menu where you hover on desktop and it sort of shows you that mega menu like we just saw, this is a sort of different interface, which is you click to expand and then it's locked. So even if I move my mouse away, it's still there. This type of interaction is something that you're going to want to decide based on essentially your personal preference on how you think it's easiest to shop and best interact with these things. One thing I want to note here, and the reason I'm showing it, is though it looks like there's a lot of things going on in terms of the amount of content here in this menu. If you realize actually there's one skillet, this is all the same product. These are just different variants of the product. So these are different sizes that have been split out. And there's a lid, and there's a Dutch oven, and then there's sets. So essentially, there's 2 core products here with a couple combinations of them, but it looks like they have a really large catalog. And that's basically a brand presentation thing and also a quick shop thing. So if I know I'm really into cast iron skillets, I know I always go for my number 8. That's sort of my personal preference, etc. I don't have to just click on a sort of generic listing, search around, find the different one, because this is all nested as one product. So there's a single product page here that has multiple sizes, but that's actually sort of exploded out here. So this is sort of a way to make a smaller catalog look larger and just show more of the options in the menu instead of having someone drill down through a collection to find it. I also want to show a different example of a company, Porter Road, that does fresh and frozen, artisanally butchered meats out of Nashville. They actually do have a lot of products in this catalog, but instead of making a small catalog look big, what we're doing here is actually sort of the opposite. We have a large catalog, but we don't want it to be too overwhelming at first. So instead, you actually are just breaking it down into those sort of core components and saying, here are all things beef, here are all things pork, lamb, and chicken. And so even though if you go into one of these, there are a ton of options, and it does vary seasonally and daily and so forth. This is really when you start to get into the browsing experience and you see that there's a lot of inventory, there's a lot of different cuts. We don't want to present someone with so many options right off the bat that they are stuck and saying, well, do I want a steak, or do I want a porterhouse, or do I want this cut, or what? Just let's ease you into the process and use the information architecture to steer people in a direction on a comfortable path to where they can find what they need and want more easily. And in this case, it's easier to remove some of that choice from the beginning and provide it later than to force a decision and an analysis before you even click on anything. And then finally, I'll just show you sort of the opposite approach to that, which is Gempler's, which is a agricultural landscaping and sort of tool supply store. So they do a lot of B2B, but they also, you can go and buy a Carhartt jacket or something like that. They have a catalog of thousands and thousands of SKUs. And so one of the primary ways in which people interact with the site is actually through search, because it's faster. If you know what you're looking for, just search it. And so this is a very different focus where search is really front and center and is used really heavily. On the other hand, we have these sort of mega menus where there's so much that it doesn't actually necessarily fit into one scroll, into one screen. And so we have a really big, very specific level of interaction, because if you're a returning customer and you're a business customer and you know exactly what you need, you can drill down, you can know the category, you know your subcategory, and actually it can be very efficient. For most folks, they'll go search, or they'll just click on this top level item, which is in fact its own collection as well. And so we essentially have 3 levels of collections. We have a sort of what we call level 1, the primary one, the secondary, which is sort of the next narrowest category, and then the ultra specific 3rd level category. And if you have a catalog that's really big, again, the technique in which you lay out your links, your menu system is going to be very, very different. So all of these are different examples of how you might steer people into the right place. Again, it's going to be dependent on your customer, what they expect, what they need, how many products you have, and what you think is the best path to get them where they're going. For some, it actually searches the best path. For others, it's limiting choice. And if you're a smaller company, sometimes actually providing all the choice at once makes your site look a little more robust and lets people get where they're going a little quicker than having to step through. So hopefully that helps show some examples as well. I'm just going to jump back to the deck. Let's see. All right. And again, the ultimate goal is to sort of anticipate what people want and try to provide that. The other thing I'll note just finally on IA is that one of the trickiest challenges you'll have in making these decisions is if you have a retail store or stores and an online location, and figuring out how much emphasis do I want to put on people who are visiting the retail store, or let's say doing local pickup or local actions where they physically will be present with you versus the online catalog. And that is also something that you'll need to workshop and find other folks who are maybe doing a similar thing, and determine that you won't just have one path to shop. There will be the sort of local customer path, and then there will be the national customer path, and to just be clear in terms of what they should expect and make sure that people can get into that right kind of category on their own. So setting up your menu system and your information architecture is one of the things that will help folks trust that you have, a robust site, a robust brand. It's stable, it's established, it's well organized. I can find things, no problems, etc. But ultimately, there are other things that are really important into people actually trusting your online presence and determining that they should give over their credit card info to you. So I mentioned a little while ago, address and location, if at all possible, is great. And so that's one of the advantages some of folks who have physical retail brick and mortar stores have, is they just have this address. You can Google map it, you can street view it, like they're there. We know that they are an entity that exists. And if I really had a problem, I could show up there and someone would talk to me. There's that sense of accountability and stability. Because it's so easy to make sites on the internet now, and because there's always hacks and fraud, this and whatever in the news, people are a little wary. Part of the way that they get over that wariness is to do some due diligence. They're going to Google around your brand name. They're going to look for your social profiles, particularly go on Instagram, go on Facebook, see if it seems that people are actually interacting and that's actively maintained and so forth. And they're going to look to see, hey, do they have a place that it exists, or if I need to return something, like they're not just going to disappear, right? And so address and location, if you can add, is great. Having an about page with a photo. I know a lot of people are sensitive to photos of themselves and are very self-conscious, but honestly, you can make it a fun photo. You could make it a serious photo. Have something that sort of shows some personality and also some, again, accountability in terms of who you are, or show a team shot, or you show a shot of the warehouse and all the thousands of products you have. Something that's going to show that, again, you're real, you exist, and you're not afraid. This is your store, and you're putting out your shingle. And if you had retail, someone would just walk up to you and say hi to you, and just think about that in terms of the web. A lot of times people will look for the contact page in the upper right as well, looking for some sort of contact info, or really the footer, the bottom of the site. People expect to find links to social, find links to policies like shipping policy, return policy, find links to a contact or customer service, find links to about, all of that stuff in the footer. A lot of people, if they're returning or if they're checking out a new brand, they'll scan content and then scroll all the way down, check, okay, does this here? Oh, I'm going to look at that, and maybe even scroll back up, but just to see if that's all there. So I would encourage that for the footer as well. You don't necessarily have to have those policy links elsewhere. People do expect it in the footer. You don't have to put it on the top of your website, sort of interrupt other things. People know to look for the back end sort of nitty gritty details. How do I get this? Will they accept a return, etc. in the footer always. It also used to be, 10, 15, 20 years ago, that the web was a much less secure place. And so we would have to go try to find a badge or some sort of SSL insignia or logos and saying, hey, this is trustworthy, it's encrypted, whatever. Now people know, they can check for a green bar in their browser, or they just know this is an e-commerce website. If I'm being warned that this is insecure, it is secure. You do not need to add extra trust badges. And in fact, now it's sort of a red flag, because if you're saying, calling out on a product page saying, hey, I have a secure website. It's like, well, yeah, of course. Wait, why would you be jumping up and down saying this? Like, we assumed you were, but now that you're jumping up and down saying it, we're actually more suspicious that maybe it's not. Just save your money, save the time. Don't bother with that. If you concentrate on these other trust factors, there'll be no need for you to have extra security badges on your website. And then, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, there are a lot of little red flags, and those do add up. So if I'm going and browsing through a site and I'm like, oh, there's no about page, and then the contact page is just a form, it doesn't say where you are physically, doesn't say what your hours are, doesn't say who owns the company, doesn't say whatever. There's just nothing there. That's weird. And then if I see a typo later, or the shipping is too high, whatever, all of these little things that are little question marks and adding up are going to make, well, maybe I'll do this tomorrow, or this doesn't look right to me, right? So I want to make sure that all your ducks are in a row, and all of these little things, all of these details are really gone through. There are also other ways to kind of strategize how to do more trust signals. Let's say, you're operating your business out of your house, like a lot of folks, and you don't want to put your home address on the web and for the business. That's totally fine. But if you're making your own products, let's say, and you're in Hawaii, you could say, handmade in Honolulu, Hawaii, or whatever, or something signifying that you have a sense of place and that you exist somewhere, even if you're not giving the specifics. There are little things that you could do to sort of encourage on a customer service or a contact page saying, we're located in Walla Walla, Washington, and we have Pacific hours, and our our great customer service rep, Colleen, would be happy to help you. Just leave a message. You're not really saying much. You're saying basically where you are, and maybe that there's a real human that's there, but it still feels a lot better than just a blank form. And so I encourage you to think about that. All right, so that said, we're sort of segueing into some of the back-end stuff, which is complicated setup on your end as the merchant, but it's something that you intrinsically actually want to make look simple to the customer on the front end, and that's shipping, fulfillment, and customer service. Overall, shipping is one of the things that can make and break you on the web, or it's sort of unfortunate for startups and for the smaller e-commerce businesses that now Amazon over the years has made the standard free. And what you have to understand, if you don't already, looking into starting a business, is free shipping is never free. It's built into margin. And the question is, how much is that margin? How much is that shipping? How much can you eat into it? And what happens if you say, well, we can afford to do free shipping over this amount because our margin over this amount is this? Then what happens if someone returns something and you have to eat that shipping, or you're paying for the label, or things get misdelivered and you have a certain percentage of extra FedEx charges or what have you? Things will happen. And so it's something that, though I encourage you to think of some level of free shipping as the standard, because that's really what we've all kind of gotten spoiled by and come to expect on the web because of the major retailers. It's going to depend on what your margins are and how expensive your product is. If your product is or your average order value you think is going to be over $100, people are going to really expect free shipping. If you don't offer it, that's going to be an anomaly within the competitors in your space. If you sell something that's $25, there's much more of a conditioned expectation that you will probably have to buy multiple items in order to hit some sort of free shipping threshold, whether that's $50 or $75 or what have you. That said, we talked a little bit yesterday, we can provide flat rates or real-time carrier rates. This really is going to depend on how your product is sold and what your product assortment is. So if you're selling something that's really easy to ship, like a t-shirt, where you can shove that into any postal service envelope, any carrier's envelope and have a pretty low flat rate. And you can even stuff, multiple t-shirts, 3 t-shirts into one envelope and pay the same as one t-shirt. You're going to have much simpler shipping charges that you could offer, because you can say, well, if they buy 1, it's this. If you buy 4, it's this. If you buy up to 10, it's this. And that's it. And you can set up flat rates. Or if you have something that's extremely modular, you're selling something that comes in a specific size box, and very clearly, we can fit up to 4 of these in one box, and after that, it's going to get more expensive, and after that, this tier is going to happen. You know that you're going to sort of step up in a tier because your product is so modular that you know exactly how many units can fit in a box. And it's really when we have a larger product catalog, or you're selling things that have a lot of variety, that shipping becomes much more complex in terms of what you're going to actually pay as the merchant. So if you are selling t-shirts and candles and brooms and lamps and that are fragile and all these things that might go together in some way in a store, what if someone buys 2 lamps? What if someone buys a t-shirt and a broom, and you need this super huge box, even though it's just for the one product and it's not for the other? It becomes very difficult to calculate. Some of these tricky problems can be solved with basically apps, and here we're talking about Shopify, and I think Shopify has the most robust app ecosystem for shipping handling of the major platforms, except for Magento. But we have a few here, which these are all links, so that when you get the deck at the end, you can click on them and check them out. There's intuitive shipping, bespoke shipping, advanced shipping rules, and Zapiet. Zapiet is basically designed to do advanced local pickup and delivery routing, so that someone can pick a specific window of time in which they can pick something up. You can block it out and say it needs to be 24 hours in advance and not on Saturdays, and not for this product and not for that product, but have different levels of enforcement, different combos, etc. for local pickup, whether that's curbside or for delivery. You can define delivery radius, say if it's over this amount of miles, charge this upcharge, etc. Also handles tipping and all that fun stuff. It's a lot to set up, but it can do a lot of really custom things. These other ones are more designed to do advanced combinations of rules. So you might have a rule and say, well, if someone orders 1 through quantity 10 t-shirts, like this is the rule. But if someone orders 1 through 10 lamps, that's a very different rule. But again, if someone orders the combo, how do we quote it? You don't want to get them getting the t-shirt rate just because they have a t-shirt, because if they have a lamp, that's going to be a hugely different fee. But if they're charged a double lamp rate when it's just one other thing that can actually fit in that lamp box, let's say, because it's soft and whatever and flexible, then we shouldn't really be charging them that either. And so these apps allow you to take the specific parameters of the products that you have and create combination rules based on logic, and saying, well, if there's more than one of these and more than one of these, but not this other thing that's huge, then take that rate, blend it with this rate, minus $5, whatever it needs, or yes, it will need an extra box, or no, it won't need an extra box in this case, and allow you to set up all of these different layers of logic, which of course then are on either the state level, country level, or zip code level, or it's within a 90-mile radius of our store, or within this half of the state, do this. And it's going to allow you to set up that level of logic, which is really the only way that you can get away with having a decent shipping quote. So at the end of the day, there's going to be a differential in the charges that you are able to get from the customer for shipping, and what shipping is actually costing you, the merchant. There's always going to be a difference. Sometimes you're going to make money on shipping, sometimes you're going to lose money. And the trick is to keep that in balance as much as possible. I don't think anyone who sells online expects to really make money on shipping. On a good day, you might make money on shipping, and then on that next day, you might lose it. So it's kind of like trying to really get to a break even more than it is to be like profitable, or just to prevent yourself from being too unprofitable, with some customer order something and said, well, yeah, I mean, they put this in their cart and they ordered it and we quoted them this price, and in reality, we have to pay double. Like, do we cancel the order? Or do we, eat it for this order and try to correct it? And that's the kind of thing that you're going to encounter when you're first starting out. And the more you can try to, account for that in the beginning, plan for that, run your own test orders and see, the better you're going to be in terms of not, losing money on shipping. And that's really the balance that we have to go across. So as part of that, I'm going to show you next how to actually fulfill an order, how to evaluate fraud, looking at partial shipments. I know there's only one thing in stock, so I'm going to ship that out and I'm going to ship another box later. Some other fancier kind of software options, talk about those, and then talk about managed warehouses and some other options for actually getting things fulfilled and shipped out. So I'm going to switch screens here again back to the browser. And saw a question about business incorporated in the States but ran from overseas. Should we list our stateside mailing address and contact and say where we're operating out of? If you are an international company and have multiple presences, but your web store is really for US customers and fulfilled out of the US, I would say, we are so-and-so, a division of such and such company based in Japan. This is a US division. All of our customer service representatives are based in the US, or we fulfill out of Texas, or, whatever the case may be, to make sure that there's clarity. If you're a more known entity, that people say, oh, I wonder if it's coming from, Japan or something, just to be clear about that in some way. All right. So we're back into the back end of Shopify in our test store. We have our main home dashboard. What I've done is I've put through a test order, and we can see in this dashboard, there's some older sort of test orders I did, and you can see that one was shipped. And we can see that the ones that have been paid but not fulfilled are showing, hey, there's something to fulfill here. So if I click into this, we can see that I bought the test product. I was charged a priority mail live rate. I used our New York address, so you can see that I collected the requisite tax because we operate in New York as well. And one of the things you want to look at just before you really put something in a box is, should I put this, is this legit? Am I going to get ripped off if I send this out? And one of the ways in that Shopify will evaluate that is in the fraud analysis. So we can see the sort of details about the person who purchased. In this case, the billing address matches the shipping address. That's something you're going to glance at. And if the shipping address is Australia, but the billing address is New York, you're like, is that someone ordering from themselves? Is it a gift, or is there something weird going on? And honestly, a lot of fraud that I see on the web is international based for whatever reason. So in this fraud analysis, we can view this and we can see all the different parameters that went into Shopify's calculation about whether it was fraudulent. So if it was actually potentially fraudulent, Shopify would flag this with an orange flag here, a little sort of caution sign, caution triangle with an exclamation point in it. And if that was really quite possibly fraudulent, it would have a red caution flag here. Now you can see that there's a lot of factors that go into it. So the one red flag is, well, I am based in Honolulu, although I used a New York address to make this order, so obviously I'm not close to that address. My physical location when I place this order does not match. Sometimes that happens, someone orders something on vacation, they ship it back to their house, that kind of thing. It's not supremely weird, but it's something. The CVV code isn't available. That's because I'm using a dummy test gateway for this order. So that's, in this context, is fine. And the same with the match here. There is actually no credit card transaction happening in this context because it's in a test gateway, so that's fine. So there's one payment attempt. If I tried using my card and I typoed it 3 times in a row, it would say there are 3 payment attempts. And that's something where if you maybe see 10 payment attempts or something, is it someone trying to use a stolen card and they're getting the details wrong and keeps failing? Or is it something that, you know, they clearly just typed it in and it worked the first time, in which case it's more chance to be legitimate. So you can see these are sort of neutral here. That's a red, and then these are green. And then, you know, they're also seeing if there's any known fraud with that person's internet address or location. That's something that would be flagged as well. If I also go in to the payment record, I'll be able to see some of these different parameters. Obviously, if this was a real payment, there would be more things here. It would have a specific ID saying this is the authorization code, this is the person's address, etc. You'd have that sort of raw credit card log here. So assuming that something's not fraudulent, it looks good, let's send it off in a box. If we want to create a label with Shopify, we could do it with UPS and USPS. Those 2 companies have paid for sort of exclusives. I imagine that at some point FedEx will join the party, but for now, it's you'd have to use an app to make a FedEx label to integrate. To do this, create a shipping label here. This will actually pop me into Shopify shipping, which looks like it's not ultimately going to go through because this is dev store, but we'll get the idea. Where this will quote out the shipping with a group rate. So Shopify sort of negotiate a bulk rate across all stores with USPS and with UPS, so you can get the sort of negotiated rate. If you have a negotiated rate already, it may or may not be better than this, and you could always double check and see which one to use. If you want to use your negotiated rate, you could hook up shipping software in order to use yours instead of theirs. Basically, we can see here too, we can define a bunch of different packages, pick the right one, make sure our total weight is right, and then it's going to come back and it'll quote out all the different costs along with the amount. And when it does that, sorry, this demo actually won't work because of this test mode, I guess. When it does that, it's going to tell me, hey, you charged the customer $14.40, and to send this priority mail, it's going to cost $13.25. And so it'll say, you know, you made $1 or whatever. Or it'll say, you charged the customer $14, but the cheapest shipping here is $40. And you're going to say, whoa, what happened? Or maybe I need to use a different carrier, or maybe I need to rebox this, or what have you. So it's going to show you that differential between what you got from the customer to cover this and what you'll actually have to pay to get this out the door. When you do this, and this is live, you'll select your method, and then you can just hit buy shipping label. It'll create it, you can print it, and it will mark it as shipped. As you mark it as shipped or fulfilled, it will automatically email that tracking number to the customer as well. The other way to do this is to use a shipping app like ShipStation is a pretty famous one, or Shippo, or what have you. What that does is it's an app that connects to your store. It dynamically pulls down all the orders that have been placed, usually like every minute or every hour, and then it pulls it into their software, where it basically gives you a different version of this interface. The reason you want to do that is there's going to be more control over rates. If you are using multiple carriers and you have multiple negotiated rates, there's going to be certain automation which might make this faster, et cetera. And then, but at the end of the day, it will route those tracking numbers back. It'll mark it fulfilled for you, so there will be no copy pasting of tracking numbers and that kind of thing. So that's a little bit in terms of how to ship something. You can see also I can choose what to fulfill from the order. So if I have multiple items here and only one has to go out, I can mark the quantity down for the one that's not available yet and still buy a label, still ship out what I have. It would then mark this order as partially fulfilled not completely fulfilled, and it would leave it open in the admin, so I could come back and then add another shipment to do that. So it can support multiple ways. Also, on Tuesday, someone did ask about drop shipping. In that case, the drop shipping company might have an app or might have some sort of order feed where, again, you are sending the order info to them for the products that they need to fulfill. They're sending back you those tracking numbers, and you would either partially or completely fulfill those here. In terms of how much you might expect to pay for shipping, there is commercial USPS rate, which Shopify has negotiated. They claim it's could be up to 70% off retail rates, like if you just go to USPS.com, and likewise for UPS. UPS, I would say in the real world, I've seen that rate be about 30% lower than maybe a retail rate. But it's going to depend on the weight, the dimensions, and where it's going, where you are, and then where it's going. So it's going to look at the origination and what is it going to cost them to pick it up where you are, and then the destination. And that can vary, based on the data on their website. They usually have maps and so forth. Places that are super rural will have extra days added and extra surcharges added. So it's going to depend. I will say that the availability of having these sort of negotiated bulk rates is a lot easier now, and it's a lot more prevalent. It used to be that you sort of had to be a really big business to get a really good rate. And overall, if you do a lot of volume, it still makes sense for you to have your own rate, but it's making it much more accessible these days. Someone asked about shipping by zones. Can you exclude overseas and exception of APOs, et cetera? Yes, by default, Shopify counts APO, FPO as part of the United States, along with Samoa, Guam, et cetera, Puerto Rico. So you could also split those out and have their own zone, and you could also just ship to those and not ship to any other countries or territories per se. So that would all be done in the shipping settings, which we did go through last time. And let's see, a couple other questions I'll try to tackle here. Degree that customers would generally be willing to pay a bit more for product if the shipping was free versus paying less for product and having a higher shipping rate. This is a good question. I think psychologically people do really want free shipping because it seems like they're getting a good deal, even if, as we know, it really is built into the cost of goods for any place that does free shipping. I think the only real concern is that if you are making your own product and it's not available anywhere else, then what you are essentially setting your own MSRP. So it's not going to be clear that you're building in a cost of shipping, if something is more than it sort of could be. But if you're taking someone else's product and you're reselling it, you don't want to have a product list price that's $10 more than anywhere else you can get on the web, because people will cross shop and say, oh, this place is expensive. So it's really going to depend on if you have control over your own sort of production. And then had a question about insurance. Is it recommended for companies to provide insurance? So be extra, so would that cost be passed on to the customer? I'm going to jump back real quick to the shipping settings. So if we go in and we manage our rates, I'm just going to show you. So like this is our live rate. There is a ability to add a handling fee to any live rate. So whether that's UPS, FedEx, DHL, USPS, et cetera. You could choose to, like, even if people don't select insurance, I'm just going to ship everything insured. I'm going to add the $2 or $5 on each one, and I'm just going to tick that box and add insurance for everything. That's one way to do it, where you could add a flat amount, or you could add a percentage. This is rolled into the rate that they see, so they do not see a separate handling fee or anything else. This just becomes the master rate that they see. It's combined and lumped in, completely transparently to them, or not transparently, completely opaquely to them. You could also do a reduction. So if you want to, for whatever reason, you think your shipping costs are a little high, but you don't want people to be dissuaded, you could put in a negative amount and actually round down on shipping if you wanted to absorb a little bit of that cost. I've seen that as well. To that end, there's also apps or services that will allow the customer to add on a separate insurance that they pay for, and that will be calculated based on the value of goods. So it could be $1, it could be $5, etc. I've seen people use them in general. I think it's a better experience if you just bake that into your costs and just make sure that it's always insured, because there is basic insurance that's built into some of the carrier rates, but it's only up to a certain amount. So if I think it's like $50 as a default for postal service or UPS or what have you. So if you're shipping a lower value product or set of products, that default insurance might be fine. And if you're selling a more of a premium or luxury good, I would definitely build that into cost. All right. Generally, we'll find that if you want to use the sort of fancier software options like ShipStation or Shippo, that there will be a monthly fee with that. That is something that you can grow into. You can start just with the first few orders, see how long it's going to take you to do with the sort of defaults and just the tools that you have. And then as you get more volume and you start doing these sort of repetitive tasks more often, you realize, oh, this would be made faster if I could do X, Y, and Z, and you learn from that. Then you can grow into a sort of fancier software option. Finally, I just want to say this is sort of if you're sort of hand fulfilling everything, if you in-house, part of your team or you or whoever is really going into your dashboard, going through processing orders every day, et cetera. Again, a shipping cutoff is something that's really good to have in your terms as well, saying, all orders shipped after or before 3 p.m. will be shipped same day, something like that is really nice and sets that expectation again. But if you are not going to fulfill things yourself or you don't want to, there are options out there. They are called either sort of managed warehouses or 3PLs, which is sort of a weird acronym for third-party logistics. And what that means is you can pay someone to warehouse things for you, pick, pack, print, and send out things on your behalf. That's something that generally you're going to scale up to. Some people do it sooner rather than later, but I would say you'd have to be sort of in the hundreds of thousands of dollars in sales typically to warrant a service like that. And in that case, instead of you sort of having your negotiated rate and you picking out the boxes and you figuring out how to do stuff, they do that as a service. So they will say, hey, if you bring us this volume of orders per month and you have this many units and they're this big, we'll give you X amount of racks in the warehouse. We'll connect you to our software. We'll pull down all the orders for you. We'll run the batches at the end of the day. We have a special relationship with FedEx. We'll pass on that rate to you. And a lot of times they'll connect and provide their rates in your store as the shipping rate. That can be really great in terms of scaling. If you have a small team, but you have a lot of orders, it takes a lot of time, and that's going to be a huge time saver. But then you will pay ultimately, for that service for someone else's time, which is a trade-off. So I'm just going to switch back to the deck, and we can get into customer service, which is sort of intrinsically tied to shipping and everything back end. So in terms of customer service, sort of best practices, really the thing is that you want to try to remember, and I know it's hard in this world that everyone's been told the customer is always right, that people will be very demanding, some people will be very entitled, and just kind of be jerks. I've seen really horrific emails to customer service reps where I've seen the sort of back end of a company. I'm like, wow, they just don't really treat people that well. They really think that you are trying to get them and they're going to be angry and so forth. And why did this break, or why didn't this come on time? And people can be mean, and I don't condone that. But the really key to customer service is empathy and trying to meet people where they're at, trying to kill them with kindness. A lot of times, even if you haven't talked to them at all once ever, people don't feel heard because maybe they're not used to feeling heard because they've tried, going down the Amazon customer service route and getting into a black hole or dead end, or they had a bad experience with another brand. But having people feel heard and communicate with them, calmly and providing accountability in terms of what's what your MO as a brand is. What do you, if you have a core value, providing great customer service and providing great products, to make sure that that's the sort of tone and that you're getting that through without getting too bogged down. I also want to talk about consistency. I think there's a lot of live chat apps out there. They're even cheaper than they used to ever be, and so forth. If you want to offer live chat or phone support, it must be consistent. Having inconsistently available live chat or phone support is worse than not having it. So if you have a live chat but you're only able to do it 2 hours a day, take it off the site. You should have regular hours where there's always someone to staff it so that people know if people come back, hey, I was shopping yesterday and then I thought I was got distracted, had to go to work, whatever, do something else and come back. And I knew that there was live chat and I go to chat because I have that question I'm about to order and it's not there. Super frustrating, and it's worse than really not having it. Phone support is something that I rarely see people provide, but the flip side of having that phone line available for support inquiries is that people will also call you to order. And so your customer service team will also be generating some revenue because there's still some folks that are just not as comfortable putting their money down the web. They want to see that there's or hear that there's someone on the line, and maybe they want to ask super specific questions. They don't want to email and wait for the email and go back and forth and whatever, and that's their style. So that's why you'll see sort of major catalog brands still having a phone number for web, because you have that experience to really lead someone to the right product, the right size, etc. And speed is important. If you can do a response, if you have an email only support or ticketing system, or what have you, within a business day, that is ideal. Beyond that, people get antsy and say, well, is anything happening over there? If this is how long it takes, how long are they going to take it to ship it, etc. Just make sure that you can try to be responsive and staff for that if you need to. Part of that too is going to be the getting bogged down in handling things like the returns or exchanges or what have you. There are apps for that. There's a lot of investment that's been made in software for customer service types of roles, because there's things that really automation helps. It helps the efficiency. You can write a macro and have the same response to a certain type of inquiry, or you can have a ticketing system which organizes all the questions for you and lets you close them out, so it's not just like one giant inbox. There are solutions to help, and there are returns platforms and stuff like that which you can grow into, and there will be a path forward. I would say of anything in terms of running the back end of an online business, the customer service aspects have the most sort of solutions out there for scaling that are available out of the box and fairly affordable. The other thing I want to note here is that if you do choose to have reviews, product reviews on your site, inevitably there will be folks that use that. Instead of emailing you and saying, hey, I have a problem with this product, they might post it as a review because that's the first thing they find, or it just seems easier. You don't have to post those. You can take those back onto email and say, hey, I saw you post this review, but we really want to fix this or help you. So that's something that you should consider. And also, if there are negative reviews and it's been constructive and it wasn't just a tear down kind of thing, and they're just they're like, I really didn't meet my expectations or something, taking the time to reply to those, again, with empathy, with understanding, because people will see that and they will trust that you as a brand are going to make it right, even if it wasn't perfect for some person. And that is actually more trustworthy than just all having 5-star reviews. Studies have shown that people actually trust an average of a 4-star review more than a 5-star, because people just know that not everyone is going to be 100% happy all the time, and not everything is perfect. Sometimes, a carrier messes up and it takes someone 2 weeks to get something. Is it your fault? Not really. Is the person upset? Yeah, and like you can still address that. Another thing I want to mention is, oh yeah, growing into automation, which I touched upon. There are a lot of software solutions out there for that, and as your team grows, you can grow into that as well. And then finally, a quick question about customer service being handled by email. I think it means vice instead of Instagram or Facebook. There's a good point that also, just like some people will find a review form and fill that out with essentially what is a customer service issue, whoever is running your social will also inevitably get people reaching out. Maybe it's direct message, maybe it's a comment on something, maybe it's a post on your wall, that kind of thing, through social. What we recommend is if people are making customer service inquiries publicly on those platforms, you really, in order to look into it for them, you need to have their name and their email and that sort of personally identifiable stuff. You may not be able to tell from their handle or their profile who they are, and to really just say, hey, we'd love to help you, but email us at customer service at yourbrand.com, and try to take that stuff onto email or take that into your ticketing system rather than have a sort of public support thread there. There are some folks who want to do, let's say, live chat support via Facebook Messenger or something like that. If you're international, doing support with WhatsApp or WeChat or something might make sense if that's sort of what everyone in your country does. So that it can be what you want it to be, but I would say most of the time, steering it towards the email is going to allow you to manage it better. All right, so we're going to do another quick demo, how to process a refund or return or exchange, and how to cancel something as well. So we're going to flip back to Shopify. So let's say I've put in my order and I feel immediate remorse, or I forgot, oh, this is the wrong address or something's happened. Basically, there's a few different scenarios for customer service where you'll need to deal with changing an order that exists. One is that you can actually edit the shipping address, and that will just allow you to feed that address into the app that you're using or create the label from that without having to, log into a different website and hand create the label, assuming you're not using a fulfillment partner. But you might want to refund someone. Maybe I got the item and I wasn't happy because it was damaged, but it's not so damaged that I want to return it, right? So maybe I'm keeping the product, but we're gonna, as a goodwill gesture, we want to, give, half off on shipping and saying we're really sorry it's damaged, or maybe I'm just going to refund you shipping, or some measure where it's not 100% refund. We could either type in a custom refund amount and say I'm going to give you, $4 back, and it's going to allow me to refund that and push that back to their card. Or I could say, I'm going to specifically refund, $5 off shipping, and it's then going to calculate the tax based on also that portion of shipping, since in this instance, shipping is taxable. Or I could say, you know what, I'm just going to actually return the item, and we're going to restock it. We're going to expect that back, and we'll restock it, and so that will become a sellable quantity again. And in that case, again, I'm going to probably go in and put in an amount. This optionally allows someone to send a notification to the customer. Presumably, you've been having email or phone call or something with them, and say, look out, the refund is going to post. You'll get an email saying that what the refund was, etc. And when that happens, let's just show you an example. I'm going to push this back. This will shoot me an email, and it's going to change my status from paid to partially refunded. I didn't put a reason in, but if I did, it would note it there. And it's also going to say who on the staff did it. So if you have multiple people logged in, you can say, oh, so-and-so was the one who gave that refund. And it's also going to change it here. If I wanted to cancel something outright, I could do that by actually going into more actions and canceling the order. Let's say that someone ordered something, it hasn't shipped yet, and something changed and they didn't need to cancel it. If that's within your policies and so forth, you could 100% cancel this order, refund everything, etc. And when that happens, that would be changed to canceled and refunded, and it was never fulfilled, and that goes to a strike through. So that shows it was not fulfilled. One question, how long are cards kept on file to do a refund process like this, and how are credit card disputes handled? So Shopify will store the credit card basically as long as it's valid. It does it in a PCI DSS compliant way, which means in Shopify, in an admin, and nowhere in the admin can you see their full 16-digit number. It's encoded it and it will show you the last 4 digits. So that's how they handle that. So they encrypt it so that they can re-push back to it, assuming it hasn't expired. And I've seen refunds given months later, and that's worked. You can't initiate a new charge with that stored credit card. You can only push it back later. In terms of credit card disputes, I have seen certain cases where there have been chargebacks and what have you. In that case, the payment processor through Shopify Payments will say, there's been a dispute in your account. Please, here's what's been said. Please provide the evidence, and you'll have a sort of claims form and go back and forth on that. In terms of restocking order returns, do you have any experience with return perishables and how to reconcile other than that's a complete loss? So yeah, if you have something perishable or generally food items, you don't actually want it back and you're not going to be able to resell it. That would be something that I would probably provide the refund with a reason, and then have a report that would tabulate all of those so that I could look at what that total sort of wastage was. Or tag that order potentially. You can tag an order and say, come up with a custom tag for it. So you could flag them and sort of sort those out and figure out what your totals would be from an accounting perspective. I think would be the way to do that. Is there a way to give select customers store credit? There's not a way from this refund interface to give store credit. The 2 ways to do that would be, 1 would be create a gift card for the customer, or 2, you can make a custom discount from them and just make it unique to them and say, hey, the next time you order, take $10 off, whatever. The gift card is more like cash. So sometimes it's better to issue the card because it feels like just something that's more substantial, I guess. But sometimes if it's sort of a loyalty thing, or like, hey, we know this was super delayed, here's 10% off your next order, it would be more like a coupon. How can you resend an item? I assume you're saying if something happened and it wasn't, shipment was lost or something like that, you could either just make a manual label, or you could make a new order on their behalf as a draft order, where you would make that order on their behalf. You would find their customer record and you would just zero it out, and you would just say, I'm creating a new sales record so that the inventory gets depleted, so the record's there and so forth, but I'm just going to zero it out. Or if they have to pay, you'd be able to pay for that again. Right. So obviously there's a lot more in the customer service world. Hopefully you don't get too bogged down, but in the end, that is a part of running the business for sure. I think a lot of people underestimate how much time that's going to take. But again, that's really going to depend on your product and also the success of your fulfillment in terms of what you're trying to ship and how successfully people get it. And then sort of dovetailing with that, we also want to chat a little bit about international sales. Basically, I know there's been a lot of interest in terms of selling internationally, and people had have had questions about it already, even in the last session. The main thing to know is that you have to be aware of shipping costs. International shipping is wildly expensive, so sometimes even if you offer it, people are not going to order because it's just too expensive. It's easily $50 to $90 to ship international shipments, even for things that are fairly small and lightweight, depending on the carrier and depending where it's going and how tracked and insured it is. The Postal Service, USPS, will ship internationally. What they do is they will have tracking on your package until they hand it off to the local post office in that country where they have a sort of delivery sharing agreement. At that point, it could take a month, it could take 2 months, it could never get there, it could be delivered the next day. It's completely wild card. I once worked for a company that did a lot of international shipping, and we had something like a 15% loss rate with the Postal Service and had to switch to DHL, even though it was so much more massively expensive because deliverability was really, really poor. You also have to keep in mind, some people reject shipments because they refuse to believe or are ignorant to the fact that there's VAT or there's local duties. And when the comes and they say, well, you owe $53 on customs for your package, they say, well, I'm not accepting it. Guess what? You, the merchant, have to pay that Postal Service or DHL or carrier to get that package back to you. So in that case, even if that person is paid for shipping, they're going to try to cancel it. They're going to want their money back, including the shipping. And so if that was a $50 each way package, you could lose $100 on that one order that someone rejected. So I just can't underscore how much sort of liability and risk there is and for surprise. You have to be extremely clear in terms of your terms and conditions about what to expect in terms of delivery time, what to expect about insurance, what to expect about duties, and who is responsible. And you have to have that in writing, and you have to have that very clear in your site. Otherwise, it's honestly more trouble than it's worth to ship internationally. What you'll also find, unless you have a sort of specialization in certain countries, that you will tend to, as a site that's probably predominantly in English, have most of your orders to the UK, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand because those are English-speaking countries. So also expect that and be prepared to quote that out and so forth. Also, if you have a product that's sold elsewhere, but was produced elsewhere outside the US, but you're in the US and you've imported that, and then you want to sell that internationally, you need a country of origin and HST codes, which are those custom codes, because the rates that customer will pay as they receive that good are dependent on where it's made, not where it's coming from. So if I imported something from China, sold it from the United States, and shipped it to Canada, based on Canada's relationship with China will dictate what tax they charge. It's not based on the relationship with the United States. And so a lot of times that will also throw people for a loop. If they assume you're an American company and for whatever reason they assume you have an American made product and you don't, and they could have vastly different taxes than they expect because you actually imported them from wherever. VAT is, I believe it's a value added tax, which they use in Europe. HST code is a harmonized system code, and that's basically you have to look up with the US Customs all the different categories of the types of products and categorize your product into the right type, because there's different tax on jackets than there are for polos, than there are for socks, than there are for car parts, than there are for everything else. And so you have to figure out the right category so that the customs can negotiate that for you. There are some services that can handle this for you or provide sort of better rates for international, but you need to be doing a lot of volume. I've worked with companies that were doing a few $1 million in sales, but not a few $1 million in sales internationally. And it basically wasn't price competitive to use these services. So you have to be pretty big to be able to have someone take on these problems for you. And then in terms of supporting languages, I would encourage you to keep in mind that if you sell the product in English, the expectation is that you will support it in English, But if you translate your site, but you don't know the language and you provide a Spanish language site, people expect that you will provide support in Spanish. So you should really not sell in different languages unless you are a native speaker or have staff who can actually support the products and the customers in the other language. Otherwise, you're setting yourself up for a lot of confusion. Oh, someone corrected me. HST is HTS, Harmonized Tariff Schedule. Thank you. As you can tell, I'm not a merchant myself, so I copied that acronym down wrong. And so again, yeah, let's just be really clear in terms of the terms and setting those expectations. As long as you say, hey, here are options. Here's what happens if you reject it. Here's what you should expect roughly in taxes. That's something that really just sets the stage so that you don't have a very costly dispute in the end. So I think we're going to take a quick 5-minute break so I can guzzle down some water and give my voice a slight break. You guys can all get up and walk around, and then we'll be back for evaluating more app services, launching, and more.
Okay, thank you, Paulo, and see you all in 5 minutes.
All right, hopefully we're all back. I'm just gonna pick up where we left off and talk about evaluating apps and services. Um, Also, actually, just right before I jump on, I'm going to answer an older question from earlier I didn't touch, but what's your take on using clone scripts to build e-commerce sites? My take is do not use clone scripts to build any sites. It will be immediately obvious that you've tried to rip off someone's design. It doesn't look professional. It looks scammy. Always start with your own thing and try to, even if it's simple, it's better than it looking like someone else's thing. Yeah, just don't use clone scripts. I don't recommend it. All right, so in evaluating apps and services, as a soon-to-be small business owner, there's going to be a lot of different pitch emails you get and tools and all kinds of things you're going to see advertised here, there, and everywhere in terms of things that you can use to help run and grow your business. The thing is that software as a service, or SaaS, as you may have heard it, the sort of awkward acronym, is typically it's not a program that you download on your computer and you have. These are all web-based kind of services, and so there's always a monthly or an annual fee. These really tend to build up over time, and some of them can be quite expensive. So what we found as a business we had to do was actually just start making a spreadsheet and putting and listing out all the different tools that we have, whether they build annually or monthly, when the renewal date was, and especially if they're annual, to make sure that we could get out of a contract if we felt like we weren't getting the value out of the tool anymore, and so forth. And what that adds up to could be thousands of dollars a month. Now, some of them are super useful. Could be, an Adobe Creative Cloud license that gives you Photoshop and things that would let you manipulate your product images and design things on the site and stuff like that. Others might be very specific, and others might be, just really geared towards solving a need that you have. So making sure that you keep track is important, and really just determining if the value is there. Time is money and money is time, but does it save either one of those things? That's the question. If I'm doing a repetitive task and that's taking me an hour to do that, is that an hour that I'm not able to do customer service, not able to fulfill orders, not able to create my product, whatever the case may be, run the business, do my bookkeeping? Is it worth it for that amount of money if that's truly going to save me an hour a month or a week or whatever? Sometimes that answer is unequivocally yes. This will definitely save me time, and I can do the ROI on it, and I can definitely take advantage of that, and it'll do well. Sometimes apps are really competitive, and other times you might look for an app or a service that does the same thing and look at 5 different companies and get a range from $100 a month to $1,000 a month. Do not assume that everything is made the same and costs the same. So that's something that is sort of a variable cost, and these costs will generally grow as you grow as a business, because the bigger you grow, the sort of more scaling you'll have to do, the more volume you have, certain things will just become more efficient with more technology. And it's a quick question about, do we have any suggestion for artists that make handmade or one-of-a-kind stuff? I would say not off the bat in terms of a specific app or something like that. I would say that for anything handmade or that you are making yourself and no one else has a copy of that, and you need good photography to sell that product. On the web, things like texture and color and detail are really hard to get across unless you have really good photography. So investing in good photography will get you further than an app, honestly. Now there are apps that where you can send out your products and have them photographed in a remote studio and they send you them back and that kind of thing. I would look into services like that as being the potential value prop for you, because that is really the only representation of your product before someone buys it, is seeing that photo that's on your site. So really, or if you can shoot the photo, but you're not good at editing it, hiring someone to do retouching or post-production, like that's going to be the service that would be valuable to you, I would say. So what I'm going to go through is I'm going to do a quick little demo of some of the things that are available on the Shopify side, what other services you might expect or look for, and sort of what we found to be kind of popular for a variety of folks, or useful for a variety of folks. I should note also, if you're on like BigCommerce, there's an app store as well. It just doesn't have as much because it's not as big of a platform or robust of a platform. And when you go with other platforms like Squarespace or Square, they really just don't play that well with others, and there's very, very limited integrations. So the Shopify App Store is basically a compendium of all the different apps that exist. I will say that there are some in here that are not, super useful, like the free shipping bar. It does add a free shipping bar, but that is also built into most themes. You should also double check and sort of make sure that that feature that you want isn't already somewhere and you just haven't turned it on, rather than adding another service. There's ones that will do a lot of marketing stuff like pop-ups, but again, depending on your email marketing provider, you might have a pop-ups tool that you could use already. You don't necessarily need to get it. So I would just say, before you really dig into apps, know what are the things that you're specifically looking for and make sure that your bases aren't already covered elsewhere. There are print on demand and dropship things that we've discussed a bit. So if you were going to go that route, I would check to see if they're compatible with the platform that you want to use before you obviously sign up and sort of get involved in them. And there are different categories as well based on the sort of type of activity. So for instance, in finances, accounting and taxes, I'm going to have QuickBooks connectors. We're going to have Xero, which is another bookkeeping platform. You're going to see there might be regionally specific tax calculators and so forth, TaxJar, which we talked about the other day. And you'll notice that for something like QuickBooks, there might actually be 4 or 5 different options on how to do it. So if you are looking for a solution, and let's say we search for, QuickBooks, and we found from the search results that actually there's all these different connectors, what we'll need to do is honestly just open up a bunch of tabs, look at all the different descriptions, and see that it does what we want it to do. Maybe we want our Shopify sales to come over as sales orders in QuickBooks. Maybe we want them to come over as invoices. Maybe we want them to be flagged and go into a certain business revenue category, whatever. If you were looking for that type of specific information, you can go through and look and see, well, of these different ones, oops, I was going to click on a few of them here. Of these different ones, what are the ones that actually have these features, and what are the ones that don't? And so we can knock some of these out. And then what is the cost? And so you can see, if we go in the full description, you can see, okay, well, I'm not a manufacturer, so I don't need to worry about the manufacturing thing, but I do care about multi-channel because I'm also on Amazon, and I want to make sure that this connector covers that, right? And you're looking through the details here. You can also email them before you sign up for anything and say, hey, I'm looking to do this, and it looks like your app does that. Is that the case? Can you confirm with me? And actually see how long it takes them to get back to you, and see what their support is like before you have even signed up. The other thing is that this app store also has reviews. So if you go to the reviews, you can see that there are different reviews based on the different actual merchants who have used it. So Shopify does verify that these are merchants who have actually installed these apps. And you can go through and see whether this is constructive feedback, whether it's bad, whether it's good. Seeing if someone might have a horror story, or someone might love it or hate it. This app seems to be actually pretty not well loved so far. And you can make a judgment in terms of whether that might be worth it. And then you're also going to want to check out screenshots and see what the dashboards are like, what is the interface like, what are the different options it has, does it look like it's covering the things that you want? And then most, but not all, will actually have a trial where you do have to install it and authorize it, but it won't charge initially. And that payment is going through Shopify. So you can be assured that there's not going to be funny business in terms of that subscription, as long as you remove it and cancel it. Then in terms of the pricing, you're going to see a really different pricing depending on the type of app and depending on the app author. So like here's another QuickBooks Sync app. It starts at 100. Okay, this one starts at 39. This one starts at free and goes up to 60. But you'll notice, the amount of data it's going to handle is going to change. This one seems cheaper, but then it has an upcharge as well. And these ones, the caps or the specific features that they're offering at the different tiers might not quite align with this one. So it takes a bit of research. You should be spending your time to figure it out, at least for something that's as complicated as a financial connector, right? Where we have, we know that the data that's flowing between them is really important. If it's a pop-up app, you're more likely to you can install it, you can try it. If you don't like it, remove it. For something that's really on the more complex end of the spectrum, you're gonna wanna really do some due diligence and check around reviews and so forth. So that's how I would approach evaluating an app and saying, do I need it? How much time does it save me? What do I think it's worth? And then what are the different price points and what are the ranges across the different apps? Is their support good? Is there a trial? And then some of them do lock you in and say you have to be billed annually, or some of them like this would say, we'll give you a discount for billing annually. For something like this, that's a pretty significant discount per month for billing annually. What I would do is I would install it monthly, see how it goes, set it up, make sure it's working, make sure it's consistent. And then if you use it for a month or 2 or 3 and it's great, switch to annual billing and save that money, but only once you've really decided that it's worth it. Quick question about web hosting. Do I need a web host if I use Shopify? Generally not. There's a file section of Shopify where you can host things, but in terms of everything that you upload to Shopify, it's handling it. You don't need a separate host. Quick question, is there a typical amount people spend on apps for a small startup? Seems like it could add up. How do you budget for starting a business? That's a great question. I would say that other than the sort of like Shopify and payment fees, those sort of core fees that you need for your email, your domain, and your platform, in terms of the add-on stuff to that, it's really going to depend on your accounting system. Do you want that synced up? Is it a web-based system or not? Are you in QuickBooks Online or QuickBooks Desktop, or using something simpler? What I find is that the data connector tools like these QuickBooks tools tend to be the most expensive. So if you really want to flow data between multiple systems and you have a lot going on, that will add up. What I would budget for is in terms of apps that would help you run your online business and get customers what they need. Like maybe it's an advanced shipping app, and you have maybe one marketing app that adds some cool features, and you have a customer service ticketing system or something like that. I would say you should figure, maybe $100, $200 a month, because probably one of them is going to be $49 a month, one might be $19 a month, and if you have a few of those are going to add up. But that's going to really depend on how big your store is and how many different things you have going on. For a store that has a dozen or so products, you're not going to need hundreds of dollars of apps, but as you grow, you might add. Someone had a question about WordPress. It was riddled with issues, and each time we add an app or extension. WordPress is very different because it's open source software. It's a kind of roll your own platform. all the extensions are sort of made by random companies and community, and anyone can sort of install anything. And I do concur that there can be a lot of issues, security, bug, and otherwise with integrating things with WordPress. WordPress is very extensible, but almost to a fault at times. To get into the Shopify App Store, these companies must be vetted. They must adhere to very specific rules and regulations of the platform. Shopify has to evaluate their apps and allow them to be part of the store. It's kind of more like the Apple App Store, where you generally don't find malicious things in the App Store because Apple has really gone through with a fine-tooth comb and said, this isn't up to our standards. There's definitely apps I've used in here that are buggy. It doesn't mean that something can't, sort of slip through the cracks, but it's not on the level of WordPress. What I've more found is that, because these are all independent companies, which is great. Sometimes I've had a couple apps that did ultimately go out of business, or they sort of sundowned and say, hey, we're not going to support this anymore, and so forth. And definitely needed to find ways to do that in different ways and so forth. But in reality, let's say in my reality, in my experience over the years, I've not had too many problems in terms of an app that I evaluated, I started to use, and then something happened. It's generally, I installed something, evaluated it, and was like, this is kind of buggy, and let's just stop right now. Yeah, given that, I would say the most common things that you're going to look for are going to be, shipping rules. They're going to be accounting connections, the label creation, anything related to customer service or discounts, ways to like bundle products, stuff like that. Where as you get into selling more over time, you're like, well, what if we did this type of sale which combined these things and did this and then this, and you realize, well, the only way to really do that is to use something where there's a promotion app that's listening in that layer and doing these things and auto adding that. And so over time it'll grow. I would say just think about bookkeeping and shipping to start, and then you can always trial stuff, decide, and remove if needed. And then just like we talked, going through other things once in a while and just refreshing what you have going on with other services. Could be web-based services. You can look what you have installed at any given time, and you can check on that in your dashboard and say, oh yeah, we haven't used this, or we removed this from the site, but I never uninstalled it and we're still paying for it, right? You can always look at what you have and sort of audit that from time to time, which is good, especially if there's multiple people involved in your site. All right, so what I would like to go next to is the launch itself. So essentially, we've gotten this far, we've done a bunch of setup, we've selected a theme, we've connected some things, we've built out our products, we've made the content, gone through and done the IA. How do we actually launch the store, and how do we actually get this going? So your mileage will be very, very different if you have built something somewhere else in the past and then you're migrating the platform, and you're going through and you are trying to move over your system, versus if this is the first time you've had a site, you're starting the site from scratch, and then this is it. If this is your first go around and you don't have anything else on the web previous, it's going to be pretty simple. You will add your domain into the domain settings of Shopify. You're going to verify that connection by hitting verify connection, and basically you're going to be launched. That's it. It's really, really simple, because there's nothing old to handle and redirect and so forth. If you're moving platforms and you have gone through another platform, another provider, and you want to switch, you can set up everything in your new system on its own, get it all ready. But when it's time to move, you will need to make sure that you've done a redirect map, which means you've gone through and you've checked all of the the web addresses, the URLs that you had elsewhere, and then map them over to the new page that you now have in its replacement. What that looks like basically is that if we go into our navigation, which is where the menus live, and we view the redirects, we can create a redirect to say in my old URL was slash, product catalog slash product name 1, 2, 3, and now my new product is going to be on product name, let's say -1, 2, 3. If I save that redirect, it means that someone who's coming in to my, a link to my old website, which was here, will get bounced to the new website and to the right place. And so redirect mapping is one of those things you need to migrate for launch. You're also going to want to make sure that you export all of your old orders, all of your old customer records, download any assets, download any previous theme files, copy down your old content if you want it, anything that will get left behind if you pull the plug on the old system, just so you have it and you have a reference, and especially if you've done orders in the past from just an audit perspective as well. That said, you still, because Shopify doesn't handle your domain email, your email won't move, and that's a huge time saver, believe me. That's not going to go anywhere, and it's just a question of bouncing people over to the right place. With that, that's really going to be the core of your launch. Question: how common is a redirect? Does it slow down the customer interface? Redirects are super common because basically content moves around on the web a lot. It will take a little longer if someone goes to the old link to get bounced to the right one, but it's better than a 404 error because you didn't remap it, and Google will want to be bounced over the right place so that it knows how to make a new association between the old, where the old content was, and where the content is now. So it is important to do. And over time, less and less people will probably have those older links, and they just won't be used, but they're sitting there just in case someone had an old bookmark or an old email or what have you. All right, so what I want to do now is bounce quickly into the wide world of marketing. This is one last question about launching. Is there a button or something you trigger to go live after building your shop? Or does your URL actually change? Basically hooking up the domain and verifying that will essentially go live. And you can password protect your development store so that it's not visible beforehand, and you just uncheck to remove the password. Your URL, if you have an old site, you will need to remap that over. So we'll have a few minutes for marketing. I'm gonna run through at a very high level, basically what these are in case they're not on your radar already, and sort of the very basic starting points of them. Obviously, we don't have time to sort of go into detail on these, but that's, there's definitely resources out there, which will include also a resources slide at the end. And of course, there's a great folks at SBA, VBOC, and YWCA who can help you, as well with these kind of things. But the number one thing I would put on your radar, if there's only one thing that you do to market your site, is email marketing. Email has the highest return on investment with the lowest effort of any marketing that you will do on your site. So because if you're able to build up a base of people who are willing to listen to you and your brand and want to hear what you have to say, these are essentially fans. Now, some might be super fans and some might be mildly interested, but they've opened their door and say, yeah, you can talk to me about this, right? So putting together an email campaign has never been easier, and it's fairly visual. Companies like MailChimp have done really well in terms of making it drag and drop and making it just very approachable from a sort of software perspective. And it's also more affordable than ever. Now, MailChimp and Klaviyo, which we'll talk about as well, are typically free up to something like 5,000 emails, which is still a good amount of people for a new business. So it might not even cost you anything in the beginning. So making sure that you're capturing people's emails, that you're somewhat regularly in touch with them so they don't completely forget 2 months down the line that they signed up for something 2 months ago and that's the first time you've ever talked to them, et cetera. Keeping in communication with folks through email is going to be a great way that you can engage. There are a lot of ways to sync your customer list with your site. So Shopify by default lets someone just tick a box or have that box ticked as you check out saying, hey, add me to your list. While we're at it, I'm checking out, add me to your email list. It will then sync with your software, get those people into a list so that you're also just passively sort of growing your list as your customer base grows. So those syncs exist and are super simple to set up. And then that basically gives you that baseline where you can do that outreach and provide sales, provide sort of lifestyle branding, provide a blog post and say, hey, this is what I'm really passionate about, et cetera. If you are doing promotions, you could also send out a coupon as well, or something of that nature, announce a markdown. We went through on Tuesday, you can limit, one per customer, or you could have a more advanced thing would be have a dynamically generated coupon as people join your list as a sort of thank you or a welcome and so forth. That's possible as well. And then there's different flows and autoresponders that you can do as a sort of phase 2, getting more advanced, getting your hands dirty, where you could offer, hey, get 10% off if you join our list. I'm sure you've seen that around the web. Then you enter the email that hooks up to a specific list that says, hey, this is the new welcome list. That sends out an email with the code, and you have that automated so that it's sort of running itself. Another flow would be an abandoned cart flow, where someone abandons checkout and they get an email or a series of emails. And you can also have various autoresponders that could keep that communication going, solicit a review, for instance, and so forth, a certain amount after you've delivered something to them. And I just have these tools, have a lot of built-in options to help keep that engagement going without having to go through and sort of do it all the time. In terms of a good rate of outreach, I would say weekly, if you're a smaller catalog, weekly at most. If you have a large catalog, you could try bi-weekly, twice a week. And if you're just starting out, I would say monthly or something where people aren't forgetting who you are or why they're on your list. The worst is you collect all the emails, you wait 6 months, and then you send an email. And that just people think it's spam. People forget, what is this brand? I signed up late at night, 6 weeks ago, whatever. Just try to keep it frequent. The other thing that's more advanced that you can do is ultimately with a tool like Klaviyo, which we'll link to in the resources as well, you can set up preferences for people. So if they unsubscribe, you can say, hey, well, actually, do you want to just, get one email a month instead of one a week, or do you want to get one a quarter or whatever? And you can add options for them. And on the flip side, you could also have people, as they're signing up, say, oh, I'm only interested in men's products, or I'm only interested in women's products, and allow people to self-segment a bit as well. I've seen brands that will email people almost daily, and I don't know, I guess it works for them, but you have to be a pretty big company and have a lot to talk about to do that. And even so, like the churn I've seen is pretty high. You may also have heard about SEO. That stands for search engine optimization. This is the sort of art and science of optimizing your online content so that it can better be found and read and interpreted by Google and Bing and search engines. If you've had any experience with it before, you'll know about sort of optimized titles and meta descriptions and things of that nature. Basically, there's both the content that's on the site, and then there's the things that are in the code of the site, but the visitor doesn't see, but the search engine robots see. And that's something like image alt text. It's a text that describes an image. That's great for ADA compliance. That's also great for Google to understand what the image is. There's things like the meta description, which is the description that you're telling Google, hey, I want this description to be featured in the search results instead of the automatic kind of scraped version that you did. That's something that you would program into the site and is in the code, but doesn't show up on your page. So there's off-page SEO, there's on-page SEO, and then there's people who might link to you. And if you get a press write-up and the newspaper links to your site, that's sort of an endorsement, a citation saying, hey, this business is considered noteworthy or legitimate from us, and that's going to help. It is something that needs active maintenance, and it requires kind of a steep learning curve in terms of initial figuring out of what's what. This is something where I just have to say the Moz blog and the Search Engine Land are two sort of publications that write all day, every day about SEO. They're very good. They're all articles by people who are very active in the industry, are pioneers in terms of what's happening, and these are good places to start. You may in your research find a lot of other marketers who are making big claims and doing YouTube videos about this and that, and writing really bold things about how such and such isn't the real thing, and I have the real secret, and so forth. Don't necessarily believe it. And these are the folks who really are important in the industry. And the other important thing to know is when you're starting out, SEO changes all the time. In general, digital marketing changes all the time. What I tell people, if you're researching SEO and the article you're reading is more than 6 months old, it's probably either not true, it's wrong, or it used to be true, but it no longer has any effectiveness. You have to be really careful in terms of the age of the articles you're reading, because it really does shift around quite a lot. There's various things that SEO and other digital marketers have found over the years, like, hey, this seems to work really well. If I do this, Google will like that. And then Google basically says, no, we're gonna ignore that now because too many people are trying to game the system. So it's always this cat and mouse game trying to figure out what is Google doing, what does Google like, because Google's never really gonna directly publish that. In terms of SEO and alt text, a question about how detailed should it be. Having optimized keywords that you researched in that will certainly help. There are best practices for ADA that are different for alt text than for Google, but basically you should briefly and succinctly describe the image content and in a way that would make sense if you couldn't actually see that image. It's less about sort of stuffing keywords into there as actually describing something that Google cannot read. Another question in terms of SEO between Google and alternative engines like DuckDuckGo. DuckDuckGo is a great sort of privacy-centric search engine. However, its market share is 2% or something. The reality is Google controls 90% of search on the web. Bing controls, a small fraction of what's left, and DuckDuckGo a little bit less than that. So in reality, when we talk about SEO, we do actually need to care about Google because that's where the users are. All right, and then in terms of digital ads and social media, just, this is its own wide world. The thing I can say is that there are companies that do social media management as a service. We typically recommend that people do it, that you do it in-house, you do it yourself, because you're the expert in the brand. You have access to all the content. You know what you want to put out there in the world, and hiring someone to do it they're either going to be scrambling and asking you all the time for photos and for content, and is this okay? And there's or they might post something that's just not something that you like, particularly, you know, if there's a tragic national event and your social media manager is just going on and posting stuff about your brand, it's not a great look, right? And it's not something you would do, but something they did, and we always find that that's hanging in the balance. Join the social media platforms that make sense for your business. You know, and your demographics. For some people, Facebook, being active on Facebook is going to make a lot of sense. For other people, it makes no sense, and vice versa on Instagram and Pinterest and so forth. If you are a B2B plumbing parts company, you do not need a Pinterest just because someone told you. Maybe you want to register and claim your, you know, brand name so that no one else sort of takes it and does something weird with it, but you do not have to invest in that as a platform, right? Do what makes sense to you and what you have the energy and the passion for. In terms of digital ads on Google and on social media, what I can say is, in a nutshell, be really careful about all the settings that are the defaults when you make a new campaign. Basically, all the platforms, if you don't know what you're doing and you just say, I want to make a campaign, and you start clicking through, everything is set up to spend as much money as possible, and it's not actually going to help your business. Number one thing to be careful there is the location. A lot of times it's not even specific to the US. It's like anyone in the world who's searching for this, or anyone who's interested. You need to be specific. The narrower you can get in terms of the targeting that you're providing, the better. You want to start out with a niche, specialized audience who are more likely to be aligned with the type of products you have than to try to, you know, plaster your message on every billboard in the United States. So add more detail. Make sure that things aren't turned on like, hey, anyone in the world, etc. Be specific about all of that, and you'll do a lot better. We also have some resource links for the Google Ads Academy, which is a whole bunch of free training. Some are really short 5-minute lessons, others are a little bit longer, to help you sort of get oriented on that. And then the other thing I would say in terms of the sort of interaction between social ads and what we call organic social posts, or just things that you just, you know, you make a Facebook post or you put a photo on Instagram, is that you should be boosting your posts. Basically, Facebook has killed the organic reach. So if you put out just a message to your audience, it won't even show it to all the people who like your page or like you on Instagram. They'll only show it to a fraction of them. They see how those sample fraction initially respond. And if it's not super favorable or it's not super engaged, that's it. That's all you get. So do not assume that just because you're posting something organically that it's going to have any reach and actually reach your audience. Facebook has created a pay-to-play kind of environment. And as they own Instagram as well, where you should probably spend $5, $10, $15 boosting your organic posts to make sure that, you know, the friends of friends and your core audience at least are the folks that are seeing it. Otherwise, you might not have almost any engagement, and you're sort of spinning your wheels in terms of actually spending the time on those platforms. And then just finally on brand, be very consistent in terms of how you approach the language, the verbiage, the photography. People who are following you will notice things over time. They'll notice if things are inconsistent, and that's, instead of being points for your brand, that's going to be points against your brand. Just try to be, to have an editorial perspective and be consistent in that if you can. And then we want to leave a few minutes for questions, so I'm going to try to wrap up with a light pass also on Google Analytics. Google Analytics is, you know, the free service from Google where you can put a tracking code on your site. Google tracks what pages people loaded when and where, and what were generally the attributes about them that were common. So Google Analytics is not personally identifiable information, or PII. It's aggregated. Google won't show you, hey, you know, Mary in Wisconsin did this on your site with this type of computer. It's going to say, hey, people in Wisconsin who visit your website did this, or people who came in through organic search did that, and so forth. And you can slice and dice and change those reports. If you want to know what actually was happening with your customers, and create a list of like, who were the people who are my VIPs, who are the people who only made one order and never came back, that's going to be in Shopify or your e-commerce platform, because that's where the actual customer data lives. And so there's going to be some reports where you want to use, a Shopify report or whatever e-commerce platform you're using, and there'll be others where it's like, well, what browser is the most common for people visiting my site, or what is my percentage of mobile versus desktop traffic, or what were the top landing pages on my site. That type of information that's been aggregated is going to be in Google Analytics, and that's going to be something that you can sort of pour over in time. It's useful when you're able to look at the data and see trends. That's something where I encourage folks, where you set your date range. Maybe at first you're looking at the last 30 days, or you're looking at last month, and then open that up and you look at that same report, but you're looking at it 3 months, or look at that same report and look at it 6 months, or if it's been open a year or multiple years, look year over year or quarter over quarter. You'll start to see patterns emerge, and those patterns will show you things that happened in the world, like COVID-19, things that were good, like, hey, I had this sale on this month and it was like twice as good. I had the sale, let's say in April, and this April was twice the revenue of last April, and this is why, and so forth. You'll start to see in those seasonal trends, like Black Friday or Christmas time, you see this surge, or expect to see that kind of volume, and you will be able to go through and you'll be able to go through and sort of start to see the things that jump out to you. And the other thing I can say is that it still has to be statistically significant. So what that means essentially is the amount of people in that view that you're looking at have to be enough of a random sample of the population that it's not just a fluke. So generally the rule of thumb is if you're looking at a data set, or you're looking at a report and it has more than 100 people and it's been over a certain period of time, then that's a good amount of people. If you said, oh wow, look at Thursday, we had 10 people convert, it could be a fluke, right? It could be a good day, and the next day there's 2. It doesn't mean it's a pattern, and just because something happened once, it's going to happen again. So when we look at repeatability, that's going to be really important, and making sure that we're not getting accidental skew or accidental factors, external factors that are going to lead us to a misunderstanding of that data. Again, there's a whole lot that is involved in analytics. I don't think I have time to really dig in and show it today, but in reality, it's basically something that you will have to get your feet wet and say, this is just something I'm going to sort of dive into. We'll also be linking to Analytics Academy in our resources, which will have tutorials and video sessions, and I'll show you where to go and sort of how to find things. Though the one last thing I'll say on that too is that in terms of Shopify, Google Analytics and Shopify are pretty much seamlessly integrated. So basically you'll sign up for an analytics account at analytics.google.com. You'll enter your website address, it'll give you a piece of code, you paste it in Shopify, Shopify takes it, interprets it, and then distributes it throughout your site in the ways that needs to happen, and that will start pulling that data in. So you can get those reporting. So though it's a bit daunting, ultimately it's something that will, it's not that difficult to set up, and there are resources from Google and elsewhere that you can see in our resources list, and also on Google Skills Shop, which has more of the sort of like Google My Business training, Google Ads training, etc. You can actually get certifications from Google as a professional through this, or as a store owner, you can just go in and you're able to just go forth and learn whatever you feel comfortable learning. Basically, the thing I would say is that as long as you have the desire and the hunger to learn, and you have of course the time, this is all ultimately attainable. I think it's really overwhelming in the beginning, but I was self-taught, my partner was self-taught, the employees we hired are all self-taught. And granted, now we have decades of experience, but in reality, we all start in the same place, which was sort of trying to learn, trying to figure it out, being hands-on, etc. So I will say, even if it seems scary now, it is something that you can pick up. Ultimately, there are obviously professionals like myself and others who can help you as well and do trainings and get more involved. And there will be trainings through, further trainings through HCDC, VBOC, SBA, and YWCA, other organizations, again, that are really trying to help people out and do sessions like this. Some of them might be solely analytics focused, et cetera. So definitely get on those email lists, and there are other resources out there as well. So with that, I think I'd like to do a quick Q&A session and then hold a couple minutes at the end for some closing thoughts. And yeah, I'm free to take questions in terms of any content that we covered, not just what we covered in this talk or the last one.
Paulo, I have a question. So
Mhm.
if we are looking for an e-commerce expert or advisor, how can we find and pick the best one for us?
Sure.
Do you have any
That's a great-
resources or advice tips how to pick the best one for you?
That's a great question. I would say there's a lot of agencies out there in a lot of different places with a lot of different specialties. Our focus at Hidden Gears is we really like to work with startups that are doing something like $1 to $30 million in revenue, who are designing, making their own goods. And we work with a lot of folks in apparel, jewelry, home goods, and specialty food. And that's sort of become our specialty over time. And so if you come to us and you are in one of those industries, let's say, there's been a lot of folks we work with to figure out a lot of the type of problems that those industries face in terms of shipping and fulfillment and just all the things that go into that business. So we are sort of better versed at that. Not that you can't walk up to us with a new type of store, and we love learning about new businesses and doing new things. But there's definitely some folks who put out a specialty and saying, if you are a food business, like this is all we do. Or there's web development companies just for breweries or just for coffee businesses, for instance. So you might find someone who has a specialty within your your vertical within your category, and that might be really good. Other thing is, maybe you really want to work with someone local because you want to have that face-to-face, or you want to keep that investment in your community, or there's things about your business that someone who is really from your place or your culture would better understand. That might be your qualifying factor. Or you say, well, I have this whole website development down pat, but I'm really looking for someone to do ads, and then you're really looking for an ad specialist. So those are the sort of breakdowns in terms of how I see people selecting partners to work with. I would say, for folks who are doing work with Google, like we're a Google partner, Google has a certification program that ensures that we've gone through Google training, Google testing, et cetera, in order to be a part of that program. That's a good indicator, at least as a baseline in terms of quality. Shopify has the Partners Program, the Experts Program, and we're Shopify Experts, which is also a selective thing. There's a Shopify Experts directory at experts.shopify.com where you can also look and say, hey, here's my budget, or here's my location, or here's the type of site or service I'm looking for. And there's actually a directory for you to find that. I know that exists also for BigCommerce, for Squarespace, for WordPress, for others. So that's how I would start my search too. And so it's not that certifications are everything, but it is at least a baseline factor. And then there's also costs. So honestly, usually agencies that are in major cities are going to be more expensive than ones that are rural. Folks who are just freelancers and are a single person enterprise are generally going to be cheaper than companies that have multiple employees and have bigger teams. But the type of projects that a single person can take on versus a team of 4 versus a team of 20 are very, very different scales. And so that budget also might be a factor. So just keep that in mind as well.
Thank you so much. That was a great answer.
Sure. I have a couple things in Q&A, the sidebar that I'll go through and try to knock out here. So question, if an app dies, what happens to your data? Your data could die with it. I've only had 2 or 3 apps cease to exist that our clients have used in the 10 plus years of doing Shopify. So yeah, I think it's fairly rare, and usually they've also said, hey, we're going to stop in 6 months or 3 months or whatever. And so you have a transition period and you can try to grab what you can, etc. But that is a good point in that an app is another company that you have a external dependency on. And so that's part of the app evaluation, saying how popular are they? Where are they based? Have they been around for a while? Does this seem like they are also stable? But generally, there's not a lot of major changes that happen in the app world in that way, thankfully. But it's always something to consider. Are there any resources you can recommend for populating organically in SEO? It's a deep topic. I would say anyone came to me asking that, I would say start reading Moz blog, start keeping tabs on search engine lands, see what's being talked about. Moz is SEO software as well, so that's something you can use to help track and do research and analyze and stuff like that, which we use as well. Moz has a great sort of running blog post called Whiteboard Fridays, where they have a video, which they also transcribe, so you don't have to watch the video, but they have a video which is sort of a Q&A and somebody whiteboarding and mapping out different aspects of SEO. And I find that really a great format in terms of understanding that topic. And so you can go through and look at all the Whiteboard Fridays and find the ones, there'll be 101s, there'll be beginner ones, start there, look for that sort of intro content, and then over time, you'll start to understand that sort of sphere and get deeper into it. One person asked, what are some immediate red flags when choosing someone to work with? Is there Yelp, but for web development? Some businesses, I mean, even if they're digital, they do have some sort of Yelp page, or you can find Google reviews or stuff like that. You are in the sort of B2B services world, you're completely valid to ask for references and say, hey, if you did an initial meeting with a company and you looked at their portfolio and said, oh, well, do you have references I could talk to in terms of whatever? Most companies should be able to give you some references, and that's sort of just as you'd interview a job candidate, you'd interview the references there, particularly with larger projects like an entire website build or something like that. You can ask for case studies as well and saying, what are the types of successes that you've gotten with other clients? Are there numbers that you could share? What should I expect as my type of business? Have you worked with a startup like mine before? If not, like, how would you approach this problem, et cetera? In terms of actual red flags, for me, the number one thing is communication. If someone sort of drops off the face of the planet and you haven't even started paying them yet, they're probably not going to be super reliable or timely when it comes to communication, particularly at a freelance level. But sometimes big agencies are so big that you can kind of get lost in the shuffle. I've had people ask me, "Will I be your biggest client, or will I be your biggest client or smallest client, or somewhere in between?" They want to know, like, what is the level of service that you're going to bring, and that's a valid question as well. I mean, red flags for me would also be generally, this is especially true in the development world, web development world. There are agencies that secretly offshore and outsource their work and don't actually do it in-house, and they're sort of rebranding other people's services, particularly like Indian development companies or places overseas that have maybe lower quality standards or less communication or whatever. I once worked with a client who had a New York City branding agency that was very expensive, design and build the whole site, and found out that a Polish agency did it and not very well. And so asking who is actually doing the work is important, saying, if I talk to you in sales, are you actually, going to be my account rep, or are you actually my SEO, or like who on your team would do this, or how much of your team would be dedicated to this, or where is your team? Those are all good questions as well. Another question, do you know of a company that can do an evaluation of my existing website e-commerce to see it's on track? I'm looking for honest evaluation, possible improvements in proper direction. Yes, that is something that we, when we're taking on new clients, we do as part of an evaluation. So we could do essentially a website audit. Usually that's with a specific intent in mind. It could be a sort of conversion optimization audit, it could be a user experience audit, and the sort of how intensive that is depends on budget and sort of scale of the website and history of the website and so forth. There are certainly other agencies out there that do what I would consider a UX or CRO audit, and just give you, say, hey, can I pay you for time, and can you give me an evaluation of like, is this good? What would you change? Is there anything weird? Did you find bugs? What would you recommend we do, etc. That's a pretty standard thing for, at least for folks that would do e-commerce web design development. Chris asked, am I a SCORE mentor? I am not. I've heard of the program, but I've never been asked to be a part of it. So, but no, but I do encourage mentorship, and yeah. Question, what would a reasonable price range and timeline be for a new basic Shopify site to be built with 20 products? Do companies also include support for copy, product description, and or category collection development as part of this cost, and basic SEO, and connecting in Google Analytics? I would say connecting Google Analytics should be 100% part of whatever Shopify site build proposal you get. Is 20 or so products, assuming that the copy is there, the photos are there, all that sort of pricing data is there to set up something new. Depends if you're blogging, depends if you want to just install a theme or you want to design or something like that. I would say on a freelancer level, you could probably find someone to sort of set things up with a theme for anywhere from, maybe $3,000 to $5,000. And if you want something actually designed and, custom built, you're going to be looking at more the sort of 8 to 15K range for something like that. But it depends. It depends on what region of the country you're in, where you're looking, the complexity of design, the amount of content. There are companies that will also do copywriting as a service, but there's also a lot of agencies such as ourselves where we actually just partner with various copywriters, and that's all they do is copywriting. And it's a question of finding the type of product and type of business and type of brand versus the style of the copywriter and their sort of expertise or their passion. And basic SEO packages are typically available where sort of optimize, do a baseline for the launch as well. And those would typically be in the low thousands, I would say, on average, but it'll really depend on who you're talking to. Based on your experience, what kind of online promotions work best for you? I myself am not a merchant, though obviously we work with a lot of merchants. So we don't do promotions ourselves per se, but we do help advise and sort of strategize. I'm not going to say anything in terms of a blanket what works best. I will say what works best is testing. Try different types of promotions. Try a direct markdown. Try couponing. Try BOGO. Try percent. Try send out an email where you split test the email. And for some of it, it's the percent off. For others, it's dollars off, if that's something that you can test in terms of it being the same, right? Try those different things and see what your email open rates are, the click rates, see what the conversion rates are for those types of campaigns versus the other ones you've done for the similar set of products. Really be testing within your business to see how people respond. I would say that's more valuable than like having some sort of like this always works, because it's really going to depend on your audience. Is there a good resource for benchmarks available for website engagement? I don't know of anything I would refer to off the top of my head. It's a fairly nuanced thing. I guess there are general sort of standards. If you start learning about sort of web analytics, like people consider like a 2% conversion rate a sort of standard conversion rate, or a bounce rate being less than 50% is sort of standard. There's some things like that. There's also things that can be skewed depending on how big your site is. So I'm not going to say that 4 pages per visit is the best or is a good amount of pages per visit, because if you have a really small website, you might never hit 4 pages for it. If you have a huge website, 4 might be terrible and 8 might be the same. So some things are relative. So I don't unfortunately have a sort of immediate go-to for that. Question: what's the beta environment and testing process like with Shopify? So basically, you can sign up for a Shopify store and they give you that sort of temporary internal myshopify.com URL. So you can password protect the store and you can access it without actually wiring up a domain, an external domain to it. So that allows you to basically stage things. You can also have a development store and a staging site or something like that, where it's, let's say you have a Shopify store, but you want to test some new things that are going to make major changes to the structure of your site or your products or something. You could have another separate development store that allow you to do that in that area. Shopify partners, such as myself, can actually make dev stores that are free, that have no limit. So it's not like the 14-day cutoff. So if you're working with a partner, they can set something up like that for you that'll allow you to test basically in perpetuity or to always have that sandbox. The testing process is similar to any platform testing process, and we use tools like BrowserStack, and we'll go through device testing and browser testing and stuff like that. You could run automated scripts if you're in a professional sort of QA environment, similar to what you do for other platforms as well. So yeah, I think that rounds everything out. Again, we have the resources here, these are all links. Oh, I did want to mention, just because this is a VBOC event too, there is a free Shopify app that allows you to provide military and first responder discounts that are validated through this GovX service, so that someone can put in their actual ID and you can verify, and it'll just automatically give them a coupon, which is really cool. That's something that we see some folks we work with getting customer service inquiries from military overseas, et cetera. So if that's something you'd like, that's always cool to do those kind of special discounts. And that has actually no cost. So I just wanted to throw that in there as well, in terms of an app that you might want to add if you do have a Shopify store. And then, I'll turn over to Victoria for these sort of last announcements.
Thank you so much, Paolo. This was very, very informative and detailed and helpful and inspiring too. So we're hoping to see a lot of new e-commerce business launching very soon. And before we end this class, just a couple of announcements. I wanted to share this message from our partners, High Step Organization. High Step Company Assistance Program awards up to $10,000 to companies to help increase their export sales. And examples of allowable use of funds include e-commerce fees, website translation and localization, digital marketing. So if you are in e-commerce business and you're interested in applying, please look up the link on the slide deck, which will be sent to you later via email. Application deadline is 4 p.m. on June 30th this year. So go ahead and check this out to learn more. And let's stay in touch. This is our contact information, Veterans Business Outreach Center of the Pacific. We'll be happy to talk to you. We do free of charge one-on-one consultations, as well as different types of workshops. So if you're a veteran, a spouse, or military in transition, please contact us. And we still have Shan, the program director for MBDA, Enterprising Women of Color Business Center here, and she would like to say a few words as well.
Thank you so much, Victoria and Paolo. Thanks for including us, Vibak and Dennis and Lori. As mentioned on Tuesday, real briefly, I'm with the new Enterprising Women of Color Business Center here at the YWCA, Oahu. That said, we can serve everyone in any of the US states and territories. Our focus is minority women-owned businesses, but we can help other businesses as well. And I just wanted to promote something really quickly. We are seeking applicants for our next, we call it our Cohort 3 Business Certification Training course, and that's slated to start May 18th. Our applications are now online. I'll put that link in the chat, and they're due May 13th. If I could just back up a little bit. So business certifications, we have come across that many small businesses aren't aware that they can qualify to get certified federally and nationally. After they get the certification, they can then compete for contracts to sell their products or services to government agencies or large corporations. So our Cohort 3 will be in 2 phases this time. The first phase we call Cohort 3A. That's going to be an overview course with 3 Zoom sessions starting on May 18th. Anyone interested is welcome to apply. Then our Cohort 3B is a more in-depth course right after 3A ends. That's 6 total Zoom sessions. And we are looking for applicants who work full-time on their business, have monthly financial statements, and have filed personal or business taxes the last 3 calendar years to maximize the limited space available. That will be more of a hands-on course. Nonetheless, I invite you to check that out. I'll throw that link in the chat and welcome any questions. You can contact us on our website. Thank you so much again, Victoria and Paolo.
Thank you so much again, everyone. Thank you, Shan. Thank you, Paolo. This was very, very valuable and informative. And thank you for attending, and thank you for great questions, everyone. Let's stay in touch.
Sounds good. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining. Take care.
Mahalo. Take care and aloha.